evening and welcome to the series finale of Philosopiece Theater. I'm your host, Christina Van Dyke, and this evening we'll be discussing Aristotle's function argument for human happiness. Aristotle thinks that if you have a clear conception of what happiness is, you will be better able, like an archer, to hit the target. And so in section 7, Aristotle is invested in finally telling you what he believes human happiness is. He starts at what initially seems to be quite a curious place. Perhaps, he says, we shall find the clear statement of what the best good is if we first grasp the function of a human being. Well, that's quite remarkable. No one, I would take it, if initially asked what human happiness is, would immediately think to turn to the function of a human being. In fact, today, we don't tend to think in terms of functions much at all. And yet for Aristotle, this is key. He believes that everything in the world, whether natural or human-made, has a function in the sense of a characteristic activity. Take this pipe. The function of a pipe is to smoke tobacco. I've been using it over the course of these evenings as a pointer, as a prop. I can do that, but that's not the function of the pipe. The function of the pipe is to be used in smoking aromatic tobacco. Same with my hat. A hat can be used for many things. It could be used for decoration. It could be used for a doorstop in a pinch. And yet, the function of a hat, what a hat is for, is to be worn on one's head for cover and sometimes for fabulous fashion statements. Why does Aristotle think that human beings have functions? Well, here's a place where he relies on observation and experience. The carpenter and the leather worker have their functions and activity, he says. Does a human being have no function? An eye, hand, foot, and in general, every part of a human being apparently has a function. Shall we say that the human being doesn't? In short, Aristotle is making what turns out to be a fallacious argument about how each part of the human being has a function, and therefore the human being as a whole has a function as well. For our purposes, we can overlook the fallacy in much the way that we're overlooking just how sexist and racist Aristotle is. That's an issue for a further discussion. Aristotle believes that human beings have a characteristic activity in just the same way that a pipe and a hat do. What is this characteristic activity? Well, here's where we get into what's distinctively human. He says, living is something that human beings do, but this is an activity we share with plants. Perception, movement, self-directed movement, these are activities that human beings participate in, but we share them with all other animals. What is it then that is distinctively human? Aristotle says the remaining possibility is some sort of life of action on the part of the soul that has reason. He distinguishes practical reasoning from theoretical reasoning, and he thinks both kinds of reasoning are involved in being human. The function of a human being, then, is the life of activity expressing reason. So far, so good. But we haven't yet brought in the idea of the good. That arises when Aristotle says that the good for a thing is performing its function well. This is a pipe, as I've mentioned. In fact, it's William Harry Jellema's pipe, who is one of the very first philosophy professors at Calvin College. Whether it's a good pipe depends on whether it smokes tobacco well. Now, I don't smoke, so I have no idea. But given that Harry Jellema used it all those years, we can assume that this is a good pipe in the sense of performing its function well. The good for a human being, then, is going to be performing its function well. When you got dressed this morning, if you did, there's no shame in staying in pajamas all day during quarantine. If you got dressed this morning, you made a series of choices about what clothes you wanted to wear, what kinds of activities you were going to participate in. All of these involve practical reasoning. If, after having gotten dressed, you then started working on your homework, or started reading a book, or started watching an educational video, then you also have been taking part in theoretical reasoning. The good human being, and here good in the sense of excellent, not in the sense of morally good. Moral goodness starts to show up more when we talk about virtue in Book 2. The good human being, then, lives the life of activity, expressing reason well. So where does happiness fall in all of this? Aristotle here makes what might seem like a leap. He says the good for a human being is being good at the human function. Human happiness, then, for Aristotle, is a matter of being good at being human. The function of a human being is intrinsically related to what kind of a thing it is. Aristotle believes that human beings are, by nature, rational animals. Happiness, then, for Aristotle, is the life of activity expressing reason well. A flourishing human life is a life where you engage and maximize all the various potentialities that you have as a human being. You have the potential to engage in loving relationships. When you do that well, Aristotle says, you're closer to happiness. You have the potential for learning philosophy. If you do that well, Aristotle says, you're getting closer to the highest good. Aristotle doesn't just give us this argument and end Book 1. Instead, he goes on to give you a defense of this argument. And the most important part of this for our purposes is when he distinguishes between three kinds of goods. Happiness involves some amount of all three kinds of goods, but it does so in the right kind of order and in the right kind of amount. External goods, for Aristotle, are every type of thing that it's better to have than to lack, and that's external to you as a living, breathing human being. Your friends, your family, those are external goods for Aristotle. Your food, your home. And Aristotle says we're going to need a certain amount of those in our life. If you're starving, you're going to have a hard time living the life of activity expressing reason well. Just think about how hard it is to study when you're really hungry. Goods of the body include things like health and strength and beauty. This enters into some of the more controversial aspects of Aristotle's theory. What I'm presenting you with is the most charitable version of it that I can construe. And on that charitable version, what Aristotle is doing is not giving you a prescriptive account of happiness. He's not telling you that he thinks happiness ought to include health and beauty, etc. He's giving you a descriptive account. If you look around the world and you look at people who are flourishing, happiness does seem to involve some amount of health and strength and beauty. Yet, Aristotle says that the most important good of these three goods is goods of the soul. Goods of the soul include virtue, goods of the soul include intelligence, understanding. Goods of the soul include things like love. It's a broad general account, and it's an outline. It doesn't tell you individually what you should be going out and doing. In my opinion, that's one of the beauties of Aristotle's theory. He gives us a broad framework in which we can carve out our own paths and recognize the way that all the goods in our lives either aim towards the actual flourishing life, or sometimes we're going to notice that some of the things that we've been paying attention to and some of the things that we've been doing actually interfere with our attempt to live a flourishing life. And then we're going to have to rethink those sorts of activities. That's all for this evening. Thank you for joining me for part 3, the series finale of Philosopiece Theater. I'm your host, Christina Van Dyke, and it's been my pleasure to talk through the Nicomachean Ethics Book I with you over the course of these past 3 evenings. Good evening and good reading. Generous support for this program has been provided by Andrew Arlig's Smoking Jacket, William Harry Jelibus Pipe, and most of all, Pandemic 2020, giving professors all over the world the chance to learn new technology in a hurry.